Good evening, everyone. My name's Robert Gregory. I'm CEO of the Australian Jewish Association. Welcome to everyone who's joined us tonight on Zoom, on Facebook, to the people listening on J-Air Community Radio, and to the people watching the recording on YouTube. Just a reminder that if you're with us on Zoom and you have a question, please raise your hand with the emoji, and we'll get to some questions in the second half of the evening. We may skip to some new people as well for the questions, so make sure you raise your hand early. Tonight we have a very special Zoom session. We have Felice Friedson, one of the first women in the Middle East to found her own media company, the Media Line. Felice is covering Israel and the Middle East, and she's going to speak about the unique challenges involved in that. So it's going to be a very, very interesting Zoom session. Thanks to Romy Liebler for organizing, and over to you, Felice.
Well, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to join the Australian Jewish Association this evening. And many of you, I'm sure, are concerned about what you see each and every day in the news. I wanted to take a moment just to think about the fact that since October 7th, this has been a traumatic state for the Jewish state, a trauma for the Jewish community globally. And what really is near and dear to me is looking at journalism at large and how really journalism has gone downward. And many of us don't always understand and reflect upon how this is so important to everything that we do each and every day. So balanced coverage and what I'm going to speak about now is much about journalism as it is understanding the facts on the ground. And I think that is where I want to begin. When each of us look at our television or listen to radio, which will be on now, or YouTube, or opening up newspapers, which are becoming more obsolete, we often don't know how to read what's happening in the news. And the first thing I want to begin with is really explaining to everybody how important it is to look at different news outlets. And that means things out of your comfort zone to understand a clear picture of what's happening. Every single news outlet around us is jumping to get the information of what's happening. So if you're going to look at the headlines even of what just happened with Prime Minister Netanyahu meeting with President Trump, there's going to be all kinds of stories coming out about they met, nothing happened. It's at a stall, which is true at the moment because what happened is you need to understand the context of what's happening in that story. So what we did yesterday as a news agency, as an example, is we looked at what might happen in that meeting and spoke to analysts and experts to really understand the deeper, I'd say, outcome of what was going to happen from that meeting. And because you have to listen to Hamas, often when Hamas says something, they mean what they say. That has really been a focal point that we have honed in on for years, that trust what they're saying, they mean what they say. And if they say that they're not ready yet with any kind of full plan, that what Israel is proposing is not where they are, they mean it. At the moment, what seems to be the situation that we're looking at is about 80 to 90% of an agreement has come to fruition. There are some very key points that are really not completed, and that has to do with how aid will be distributed, because what happens is that in Gaza, Hamas is asking for the United Nations to administer the aid in Gaza. And, we have an organization now that through the United States, GHF, which is administering tons of food each and every day, and they don't want them continuing to do so after a ceasefire. One of the other areas of contention is the area, for example, that they're speaking about that has to do with the end of war. And we're talking here about, is it going to be a full-blown end of war, or is it going to be a partial end of war? And Hamas wants the war to end. They don't want the IDF back in. They don't want the IDF fighting anymore. So there are areas that have not been agreed upon yet, and that's why we didn't see any major statements coming out of the White House. So if you see any news outlets saying anything different, it is not the case. I think that it's important, again, to understand that there also are every person has an agenda. So you have Hamas with an agenda. You have Israel too, with their own agenda of what they're trying to get out as a message to the media. And of course, then you have those that have advocacy organizations on either side that want their agendas out. And you're always dealing within the realm of the agenda message that is being, I would say, positioned all over the world simultaneously. We also encounter the area of social media, and social media has become one of the biggest tools of war. It has become a tool of war, I would say, for every side during this war, but primarily for Hamas, because Hamas has utilized this tool in a tremendous way. If you look at how that they have become brilliant in using it to guide particularly the rhetoric, which drives the anti-Semitism that we see. If we look at what happened in Australia just in the past week, the firebombing of the 150-year-old synagogue, the attack on the restaurant, it all stems from hatred. It's hatred in words, but those words of hatred, they come from starting with anti-Israel rhetoric. And I think that one of the biggest problems that we face today and the world faces today, whether it's the Israelis facing it, the Jewish community facing it, the lovers of freedom and democracy and anti hate, is facing the fact that there's a lack of education, that you can't delete Jewish history from school books, you can't delete Jewish history in universities, in classrooms, and definitely not in community dialogue. More important, you need to explain to people when they're looking at journalism at large, and this is where I go back to journalism. I always say when I speak to a group, and often even a large group of 1,000 people, how many of you, by raise of hands, study journalism? Maybe I have 4 or 5 that'll come back and say they have, which means that most people don't understand the basics of what is journalism supposed to be as opposed to what you're actually reading. So you might get your news a local secular newspaper, you might get your news from a Jewish newspaper. You might look at, if you really are a news hound, you might look at some of the other sites around the world. And I say you need to be looking at Arab sites and Israeli sites and European sites and really delving into the right and the left and understanding the complete picture. How many people understand what the difference is between a news story and actually writing an analysis or a feature or an opinion? And a lot of what we see today is opinion as opposed to the hard facts of what goes down on the ground. So we have a report that comes out, and it's a new report that was unveiled by the Dina Project yesterday with Mrs. Michal Herzog, the wife of President Herzog. And it talks about all of the horrible offenses and sexual violence against women during October 7th. More and more women came forward to talk about it, something that we know the United Nations denied, something that, of course, Hamas has pushed blatantly to obliterate, but it's there and it's real. And here's an example of where news outlets around the world and many more are writing about it, but not enough. And that's where when Jewish communities, or again, others that are really believe that all democracies need to be heard properly, they should be coming out and speaking forward about the issues to their papers and saying, why aren't you covering an issue fairly? Why aren't you bringing this out to the public realm? Because I think we begin with telling the audience what's needed because so many people are telling everyone what's wrong. There's a lot wrong within the media arena. And I want to take a moment now because back to balanced reporting. Balanced reporting happens when you are giving all sides so people can be smart and make decisions. And educated people can do that. Part of the problem we see is that there's so many within the public realm today that are comfortable with their side. And their side, all that does is makes everybody feel good on their side, and it doesn't really shape the narrative. It doesn't help you to understand the full picture of what's happening. And therefore, we end up with a lot of misinformation that is consistent that we see on a regular basis. You know, I want to turn a second to anti-Semitism and look at some of the things that have just happened recently. And this again, too, shapes how we are looking at the balance of news. So if you look at the things that happened recently in terms of in Glastonbury in the UK, and there was a concert by a rap group, Bob Villain, named after Bob Villain Dylan, which is kind of funny, but they were doing something awful. If many of you haven't heard, that they were chanting and leading chants and saying death to the IDF. The BBC broadcasted this live and they retracted it after. The damage was done. So many times during the war, and looking at what we were doing in news and understanding it, we saw this happen. Now, it is the responsibility of news outlets not to be part of the message, not to be part of the story. And this is critical to everything that's happening as we witness day by day things changing. It's one small example. BBC had another case in point in February of 2025 when they had a documentary that they had unveiled, Gaza: How to Survive a War Zone, but they failed to say that the narrator was the son of a Hamas militia member. Again, how many people are going to know that? They're going to see the film, they're not going to understand what's happening, and there you go. You're going to have imbalance in reporting, imbalance in what the reader is seeing. And this is a case in point that if we don't have a knowledgeable public to understand what to do, how to read the news, then it becomes extremely not just worrisome, but it becomes something that actually will lead to what we're seeing on the streets today, the actual violence. The killing, as we saw, of the young couple who worked in the embassy in Washington for Israel, which was a horrific event. And of course, there was a peaceful march for hostages in Boulder, Colorado, where a woman succumbed to her wounds, Karen Diamond, who passed away recently. There are too many of these kinds of incidents that are occurring on a regular basis. But then you also witness that I'm hearing all over the globe from many communities is that the media is not reporting things that are happening on a regular basis. These incidents need to be reported. They need to be reported accurately, and they need to be held up and really rebuked if they are not reporting the story. Too many people are too quiet and afraid to be public, and they ask, what can I do? And here is an example where I feel the public needs to engage with media more and understand the dynamics of coverage. Covering the Middle East is very complex. So we cover Israel. We have journalists in Israel, in Gaza, in the Palestinian Authority. We have journalists in Syria, Egypt, Pakistan. I can go on. But the bottom line is that we have people on the ground who can tell the whole story. So I'll never forget the day when we were covering the fact that there were Jews that went back to Syria when Assad fell to see their homes, and they were invited by President al-Shara as an example. 24
So I think she's just dropped out. Don't worry, we're getting it sorted as we speak. Should be fixed in no time. So while that is being fixed, I'm sure everyone's been keeping up to date with everything that's going on. It's obviously been a very busy few days. Everyone probably saw AJ speaking in rallies in both Sydney and Melbourne. We were obviously partners in other cities as well, in Perth, in Brisbane. It was organised by the Minority Impact Coalition, an excellent organisation, as well as many other good partners. So those in Melbourne would have seen AJA board member Gideon Rosner speak very well. I spoke to a rally in Sydney. We had a few troublemakers, not too bad, but seemed all under control. And then those who were at the It was a private event for the Adlers in Sydney to thank them for the many, many years of service to the Jewish community. This political figures, was good to see them there. So it's very good. Rowan Dean spoke. Do we have Felice back? Not just yet. Should be any second now. Here we go. Here she is. We are back.
Okay. So I lost everyone for a few minutes because of reception, and apologies. Can't control the internet, can we? Okay. Are we back on?
Yes, we are back.
Okay,
Back
Robert,
with you.
thank you. So I'm talking about the Gaza Humanitarian Agency, the GHF, and the fact that Reuters actually put out something that was also fraudulent. It was a story about the fact that they were evidently talking about the fact that Israel was going to create camps for the Gazans. This is not the case. We don't know what's going to happen. And it's irresponsible of news agencies to, again, be putting out information that is hearsay, that isn't backed up, that isn't correct, because this is what's driving a lot of the problems as well. So, in order to do a story correctly, you have to vet several sources. Many agencies are running to just get clickbait, to make sure they have that headline first. And this is reshaping the way we see news. It's the way we see news on social media. It's the way we see news on news outlets. Everyone wakes up in the morning and they want to run to their phone and see what's happening. But that doesn't mean that the outlet spent the time to vet what's happening. They might have looked and seen what's happening through other news sites. They haven't checked on their own to really understand that a story is actually presented as you see it. And sometimes agencies make mistakes and they have to own up to it. But it happens way too often just so they can get the higher ranking. And this has become a game. The entertainment side of what we're seeing in news is not news itself. And news should be news, and opinion should be opinion. And most important, we need to understand the difference. So that's why I keep bringing you back to this issue of how important education in journalism is. I wish everyone had that opportunity to have even a day of journalism when they were younger to really understand the basics of this profession, because it is a profession. Coverage of what we're seeing right now. The imbalance is what's driving the media. The fact that we look at the Gazan health organization saying one day 50,000 Gazans are killed, 100,000 Gazans were killed. First of all, did anybody count? I mean, how do we know what that number is? It is a very difficult task during war when Israel is dealing in this case with an enemy that invaded the country on October 7th, and they killed 1,200 people and they took many hostages, as we all know, and they did brutal things to people. It's very hard to believe anything when a terrorist organization is the one that is giving that intel to the media at large. This becomes part of the problem. On the other hand, the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, sometimes does not release information, and sometimes they're late in releasing information, which makes the whole case harder for journalists who are trying to do their job. It's been a consistent problem, and this adds to the entire situation. It makes it very difficult to be able to report accurately. The Media Line, which is an American news agency covering Israel and the Middle East for 25 years. It's our 25th year, and proud to say that we have somebody in Gaza all this time. We were the first ones to show that there were tunnels that were being built through Egypt into Gaza in 2004. We have video to show it, and we kept showing over and over what was happening with those tunnels. And in 2014, doing interviews when Israel finally left in 2014 And Israel was saying, we got all of the tunnels. They didn't get all the tunnels. We all saw what happened. As a matter of fact, as we sit here, there's still somewhere between 65 to 75% of the tunnel infrastructure that we understand is probably out. We're not even sure of that number. I mean, some people are saying less, and it's the same thing, and maybe 50 something, but for all we know, we're waiting to hear what is that exact number because there are too many people saying different things. It's the same thing with how much area, what is the area in which the Israeli Defense Forces has control over in Gaza, or how much of Hamas do they have control over in Gaza? And what will the day after look like? So you're going to be looking at the news and you're going to be seeing again multiple messages coming out, and this too makes it much more confusing. I really want to stress that when we try to get the information, even from a person in Gaza, I'm sitting with a situation today where this particular person was told by the Israel Defense Forces to move. He's in the north, and it's dangerous because he's afraid he might get killed just by moving. Because Hamas is shooting at people in terms of they're trying to maintain control of the aid themselves. We see what's happening. For the most part, the humanitarian aid organizations have been in the South. There are some independent organizations. There are a few other institutions that are still delivering aid, but getting the food to the people has been complex. We've been witnessing this as we watch what's unveiling, and to understand what happens on the ground is not easy. And the fact that there were Americans who have been hurt in doing so adds to the situation. So you're really situated here in a war zone, and a war zone where Israel doesn't really want press in that much. They want to control the narrative because they have witnessed some very bad experiences in the past. But that does make it more complicated to tell you the whole story. And therefore, there are many pieces here to this puzzle that drive the end result of what we see. I want to take a little time, and I'm looking at the clock just to get a sense of where we are, and talk to you too about some of the things that go down that are underreported. And if we look at the fact, and it's mind-boggling when you think about the tens of thousands of people that were wounded during the war in Israel. And I really wonder how many people around the world know that. I don't think that they do. And you can look at the different impact that we have, whether it's somebody who's lightly wounded, moderately wounded, because everyone is labeled in terms of the Israel Defense Forces and the wounds that they get. Psychological trauma is off the charts. These stories are stories that have to be told. These are people that will need help for many, many years to come. It is an absolute outcome of the war that is underreported. To me, I look at it personally as equal to the trauma of the war itself. Israel has lost many soldiers since it's became a state. When you look at the 100,000 of soldiers that were killed, that's a huge number. And Israel is a small country with many families seeing it in multiple ways. We have someone that works for us who unfortunately has had too many funerals that he has gone to. And you see this everywhere, where everybody has somebody that's impacted by this war. And they're impacted both in the state of Israel and beyond. The untold stories of Christians fighting in the Israeli army, the untold story of Bedouins and Druze, the untold story of the damage that I went to cover. I'm still a working journalist, and I went to cover seeing what happened in Bat Yam when the Iran 12-day war took place, and to see those buildings that were just blown to pieces. It's mind-boggling that so few were killed during those 12 days, and that the shelters worked. And why did the shelters work? And all these questions are very interesting too in terms of understanding the news. But the story's not over. And to balance this story out, we have to look at what does Iran really have today? What are they holding? How far back did Israel push Iran? It was an amazing war where America came to help its ally. But if it pushed Iran back 2, 3 years, Israel is in a vicious cycle all over again. Europe is really shuddering right now. They want sanctions on Iran. They know that their missiles can reach Iran at the moment. We know that the IDF found all kinds of information, all kinds of intel showing that there were programs that they were working on, the Iranians were working on, to reach the east coast of the United States. These are not simple things. I don't know how much of that, again, has reached the masses. So balance coverage means telling all these parts of these stories so that people can understand this isn't just about today, it's about the future. Whether it's about the future of the wars that go on in Israel, how these wars unfold, that Israel is fighting multiple front wars. And I didn't even talk about the Houthis. The problem is that there are so many fronts, it's hard to do that in less than a half hour. And honestly, you also have what I call the eighth or ninth front, depending on how you count the fronts, is the media front. So you're battling so many fronts at the same time and trying to understand what's tomorrow. What is the story tomorrow? What happens with the Abraham Accords? Is it a slow process? Is it a fast process? We were one of the first to report about Syria because we have someone in Syria. Absolutely meetings taking place with Israel, and something looks like it will happen come September. It's not a shoo-in by a long shot because anything can go wrong between then. And a lot, as we all know, happens not in front of the media, it happens behind closed doors. If we look at the role of Egypt, and we'll have a story this week coming out on that, and it's important to understand what is Egypt's role this whole time, where people are looking at, some are saying Egypt was part of the problem. Others in Egypt are saying, no, we were there all the time. We were trying to help with the negotiations. It's not what everybody sees. You need to hear the different voices to understand what's the truth. And looking at what's happening right now with Iran, we have to look at what's happening with the people on the ground. I personally have been covering Iran for over 20 years. I was covering into Iran with Iranian dissident groups and understanding that they're in very severe danger. And I don't take that lightly because, as you know, many people were rounded up. Some people are saying some were let go. We don't know if they were all let go. The Jews that live there still, the thousands of Jews in Iran, are definitely in a state of harmony at the moment with the government. The government has cracked down and is paranoid. And as we witness what's happening, it's going to keep unveiling, and we have to make sure we're sharing the accurate news. And news outlets around the world should be telling that story, not hiding that story. One of the I think, outcomes of what's happened with the war and coverage is that the Jewish community asks, what can they do? The Jewish community sits back sometimes, and I think there are those that say, I'm afraid to speak out. And there are those that become very vocal. But those that are vocal are not enough. And the more that people have, I'd say, the training to speak out competently, to feel secure in doing so, things will change because staying silent only helps to aid and abet the misinformation that we see. And I think, Robert, with that, I would really appreciate it that we go to questions.
Thank you so much. It's been a really interesting insight to some of the scenes that what goes on, which is not something we see on the face of it if you just read the media. Just before we go to some questions, I wanted to ask you a question we have a lot about public broadcasters, whether they have the special responsibility. So in Australia, we have the ABC predominantly, also the SBS, which are very anti-Israel and biased. And I think, the UK, there's the BBC has similar allegations. So is there a special responsibility on public broadcasters? And then on top of that, if you don't mind, would you say maybe some of the good media, what you would consider the good media covering Israel, besides for obviously your own outlet, and some of the bad media, if you don't mind to comment on that?
Okay, you're putting me on the spot. I'm going to start with question two. I don't like to do that. We're not a watchdog organization. That is the job of an honest reporting or a camera, and that is what they do. There are organizations that do it. It's really not my role to call them out, except when an agency does something incorrectly, like I mentioned things with the BBC or with Reuters, it is our job to make note. And that is something we would write about in a news update as we have, or point to things that are absolutely blatantly incorrect. In terms of the responsibility of the public broadcasters, they have a responsibility to all. And if any ethnicity feels, and that doesn't mean if you're Jewish, not Jewish, that you're not being recognized fairly, it's incumbent on the community to meet with them and to challenge it. And I can't imagine you don't try to do that, but I may be that there aren't enough people, enough organizations in unison going together to make that statement, to make a difference.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, we have had some successes, but it's an ongoing battle there. Okay, so I see we've got a lot of people with their hands, so we're going to go to some questions. A reminder to everyone else, put up your hand if you have a question. Please keep the questions short, no statements, just one question a person. And just before we do that, I'll let everyone know that next week we will be hearing from former Senator David Leyonhjelm, who many will know. He's going to be speaking about an important topic of anti-Semitism on what's called the woke right, which is something we've seen in America. We're now seeing this phenomenon in Australia amongst the right side of politics. So he's the first person ever in Australia elected on a libertarian ticket. So he knows a bit about this. So that's next week. And also remind everyone the Israel trip is coming up very soon. I think we have literally only like 2 spots left. So if anyone hasn't signed up to join us in Israel, make sure you do. Okay, first question, Dr. Joseph Goldbaum.
Good evening. I could start with a long preamble as to why I've come to this conclusion, but it would be that during all this time of fake media and internet and whatever bad broadcasters, why the Jewish community worldwide has not utilized the one medium which can reach everybody, the non-believers, the haters, and also the believers. And that is the media form of advertising, marketing ourselves, our message, and what we want people to read, see, and believe worldwide in a concentrated and widespread format that goes not just a week, a day, but also 20 years into the future. Sure, it'll cost some money, but at least we know the message that we want to put out there. I just wonder if you could comment on that.
Well, explain what is your question?
The question is, why do we not use the advertising media to get our message across?
I think that many do. It's not like they don't. I think that you see it in social media, you see it through all kinds of social organizations. Maybe you're not, excuse me? What happened?
No, we can still hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yep.
What happened?
Nothing. We can still hear you.
Okay. So there always can be more. And yes, advertising can't hurt. And you see ads on social media. You see it through advocacy organizations. I see it all the time. It's not as if it doesn't exist. What you don't see is one message. What you don't see is organizations working together towards a common goal. So often people have different messages. You might have the hostage forum with one message. You might have somebody else about anti-Semitism at large, another organization about soldiers. I'm just giving an example. So each one has their own message flying, and it's not going to resonate in the very global manner that this gentleman is bringing up. Advertising is only a tool. It's not the same as people who are reading the news to understand the news, nor is it the same as the social media posts, which is its separate thinking, its separate market, because many elements today working in tandem, and you need them all. So I think the gentleman is correct that it helps, but it certainly does not replace the context of a news story, the full, complete perspective with sources, with understanding exactly what's happening. You can't do that in an ad or a tweet.
Thank you. Okay, Alan Friedman, you're next.
Thanks, Robert, and thanks, Felice. Felice, everyone's talking about the current war on 7 fronts, but in reality there is an 8th front, which is the media war against Israel, which clearly shapes opinion on Israel around the world and not in a positive way. And as you mentioned, we see the media readily accepting the figures of the Gazan Health Ministry without question. So if our side speaking the truth is not really working, are there other tactics that we can use?
It would help, as I said earlier, if the IDF was more comfortable with allowing the press in. And I don't mean all the time, but I think they have to have a more of a comfort zone. I keep saying, how much worse could it have been? So I feel that there should have been a way to allow the press in earlier, and even if it was controlled. I understand it's war. Those that have passed, those that have been inaccurate, shouldn't be allowed in. I mean, if they were out during war, I understand the Israeli government saying no. But you don't have 3,000 journalists sitting in Israel, and they all are that. And you can't handpick certain journalists to do the task and think the message will get out in mass. It won't. And that's from where I'm coming from. You also have the government has many arms. They have the Diaspora Affairs Ministry, the Foreign Ministry. We've always seen this, the IDF, the Prime Minister's office. And that doesn't mean they all work in tandem. And if they can't message together, some things they do, some things still don't work. And I think the stronger that the government sees itself in working together, then the stronger those messages are in getting information out as well. Back to local community, because, let's face it, you bring these issues up. If you could educate locals, community leaders, Jews, Christians, and Muslims coming together and educating them on the basics of the background of Israel's history. Israel's not perfect. Nobody's perfect. My kids aren't perfect. I mean, the bottom line is you have to begin with having confidence in your nation that you trust, that you can tell a whole story.
Thank you. Next up, we have Saul Postomsky.
Thank you very much indeed for your discussion. It has been very interesting. Could I ask you to comment, though you may not want to really, on other news agencies that really don't do the job properly? And I'm thinking particularly of Al Jazeera, that a lot of news agencies here rely upon and use, such as the ABC and SBS. And also, do you think that if a reporter or an agency in Israel is reporting not factually, that the reporters there should have their visas removed? Or is it freedom of the press and they can report rubbish and lies as well?
You ask good question, Saul. It's a complicated issue. The reality is Al Jazeera has been operating freely for years in Israel. It actually was one of the largest news outlets that the government press office gave the pass to operate freely out of Israel. So there's no surprise when you saw everything happen during the war with Gaza. I'm kind of surprised it didn't happen sooner, to be honest. Israel has revoked their license. They basically kicked them out. There is a big, I'd say, court case in motion on what's going to happen there. It's been going on for months. It's been stalled. And it's complicated because of the issues of freedom of press. In the end, Israel, you may find, will reinstate Al Jazeera to function. Al Jazeera is Qatari owned. Qatar plays a very complex role. Qatar, on one hand, has been involved in some of the worst of what we've seen in the education and changes in the universities. And Qatar has also acted as a mediator. So it's a place, it's a country that both Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump work with, as do many Middle East leaders and leaders from around the world. You find in politics, it's not always the way you'd like it, nor is it the way you see it. And because of the relationship of Al Jazeera in Doha, in Qatar, with the Qatari government, you may well find a reinstatement of Al Jazeera. You're hearing what I'm saying. That doesn't make it right, And I would certainly say that anyone who was a journalist, who was part of the terrorist organization, Israel took out many journalists that were part of the terrorist organization for Al Jazeera, and there might have been some that they're claiming that aren't, even if they claim all of them weren't. Again, this is not something simple to understand, but many of them were Hamas terrorists. So how do you have terrorists functioning in disguise, which is something has happened for years, working for media outlets? This is a known fact. As far as Al Jazeera, there's two sides of Al Jazeera. The Al Jazeera in Arabic to Egyptian and what they say there, and the Al Jazeera to the rest of the world in English, which is more subdued, more stressed, more to woo the American market or the Western market. And here you have many relying on that source. Therein lies the problem that goes back to education in schools. I will reiterate that really till I'm almost blue in the face because I've seen it and witnessed what can be done. In our agency, we have a very special, unique program, which I'm very proud of, called the Press and Policy Student Program. We've signed more than 20 universities over the years for credit, and students come for 3 months to Israel or they're abroad in their universities, and they are training in journalism and learning what journalism is. Many come from universities where they don't even know how to do journalism on the ground, speak to sources, and understand how to do deeper stories. So if we can change the tide with Jews and Christians and Muslims and ethnicities around the world, this is how you start to shape it. We have trained over 100 students, and we see how that shapes out. So there are answers that make differences for all of us for a future. But in sitting and saying what's going to happen with Al Jazeera, it's beyond our control. It's what can we do that we can educate the others so that we don't find that they're relying on Al Jazeera as their only source.
Thank you. And I should say, I think Australia might be a bit unique in that Al Jazeera is actually broadcast through our public broadcasters. I don't think that it has such a wide reach in America or Europe, but it goes into millions of houses in Australia or for whoever watches the public broadcaster. So it is a real big issue here. Next up, we have David Schulberg. You are still muted.
Sorry, couldn't find the audio button. Felice, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I am wondering, there are sites like Media Bias Fact Check, and I believe others like that, would classify the different media sources as to where they sit on the political spectrum and their credibility. Do you hold any stock on what they say?
I know of a number of these organizations, and I think they're all trying to find a way to find a comfort zone for the public to see transparency. It's only as good as the story of the day, because they look at it often in terms of a particular story and how that might rank, and then they might rank you overall, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's looking at every story. It's also only as good as those that are feeding that particular algorithm. And that's the case in any case. That's kind of what we look at in terms of feeding information that we're all concerned about, whether it's AI and understanding how AI is getting data today and where they're getting it right, where they're getting it wrong. If AI can generate photos and a news agency asks AI to generate a photo, and if that photo leans politically one way, that totally taints the story. Same thing.
Thank you. Let's go to Greg.
Okay. Hello, Felice. I enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
No worries. During your talk, you talked about people's lack of education, lack of understanding, and our organisation's about education on the core doctrine of Islam, Muhammad, the Quran, and Islam from the core text. We sort of feel that's a foundation for a house of straw. If that's understood what are your, okay, without going on, what are your thoughts or what is your experience with education on those matters, the doctrine?
Not as much, but what I can say is a little off the question. At one point, I ran a press club between Israeli and Palestinian journalists, and it was not a peace initiative, it was an educational initiative where we had 30 events in Ramallah and in Israel, bringing members of government together on multiple issues. Economic ministers, we had events on talking about first response and having the Red Crescent and Israel's Magen David together, women's issues, and it was extremely powerful and extremely successful. And the reason I bring this up is that it gave room for debate to talk about issues you don't agree with, issues you don't understand. It's really not my job to, I think, talk about the doctrine, to understand Islam from that scope. It's my job to report on what's being said. It's my job to explain what the difference is between an Arab community and a Muslim community, a Shia and a Sunni. And if it's an opinion, it's a different story. But as a journalist, and this is not where I'm speaking in an opinion piece, which I have done, it's really important that I explain that we need to convey what the Muslim religion is about. And there are many that will say it's not those that just rise as terrorists. There were just 15 Muslim leaders that sat with President Herzog this week, and we covered it. And that story already is getting a lot of pushback. There were only a few media outlets, that were there to cover it. And anyone who wanted to feel that these Muslims were propaganda agents or they were there because the organization that brought them was trying to do that is something that you're going to see in the press too. One can also say it's just libelous. And I think it's important to understand what does the Quran really say when you're getting into religion and the different sects and how it's interpreted. And there are enough Muslim clerics and leaders that speak out on this on a regular basis.
Yeah, I can see we've got a lot more questions, so let's see how many more we can get through. Anne, would you like to ask a question?
Yes. So my question is this. BBC mistranslated a girl in Palestine. Mistranslated a girl in Palestine. Question is this done on purpose or accident? And should journalists who purposely mistranslate this be not just banned from Israel, but their outlet being defunded? Second of all,
I can hear the second question.
I think maybe we'll just keep one question a person because we've got quite a bit to get through.
I actually feel that he needs to ask the BBC that. I can't speak on behalf of the BBC. I don't really know what their goal is. I've been on the BBC in the past, and I think that the BBC has shows where they can tell a story and let a journalist speak, and then there are others often that don't.
Thank you. Shoshana, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah. First of all, thank you. I really respect your candor and your clarity. My question is, you said stand up, speak out, with erudition, I guess, and stay safe. Well, I tried that with a colleague who was a dean of a university in Australia, and I was doxxed, and then my computer was hacked. So how do you do it and stay safe?
When that happens, you need to enlist security and police, and that's a whole nother level. And I'm sure you know that, and I'm sure you went to the police. I hope you did. You should have. Again, you can't be afraid to stand up for your rights. And if people feel afraid, and this is part of the fear tactic, that absolutely is part of the mission. Just make people afraid enough not to be able to do anything. This is not that I believe what should be done by anyone, any nationality, anybody. You need to be competent in the fact that you were doxxed. You had a hacking of your computer. Those are illegal. You need to deal with that even now. And you
Yeah.
need to have more strength to speak out and go out on programs and say, I was doxxed. I try to speak out. That's where the courage should come. Because maybe there were 10 people that I can count on my hands that since October 7th are the ones that are the influencers. But you need people that are journalists that are influencers in the scores. You need many, many people who are not afraid to be vocal and to understand what is the enemy. And the enemy is truth. And the enemy is reality of the facts on the ground. And are they always, as I said, in Israel's camp? Not always. But if they were always on Israel's camp, who would believe you? You're welcome.
Okay, next up we have Dina. Would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Felice. Thank you, Robert.
You're
I guess most people listening to you tonight will have a healthy skepticism about what they see in Australia on the ABC, SBS. And it's an impossible question for you to answer, probably, but we have a very big problem that the vast majority, especially the people who think they're intellectuals, just absorb the lot. And the lies and the ugliness and the half-truths are very dangerous. Tonight, I heard them mention the word concentration camps in relation to what is possibly, I don't know, a plan to get most of the Gazans into the south around Rafah. Could you comment on that, please?
Well, first of all, I want to flip the question. Do you believe that?
Dangerously, yes. Yes, I did. Till I read Times of Israel or Arut Sheva or something tomorrow. Yes. So that's me. What about the
Okay,
rest
so
of
Dina, I believe there was a horrific war. There are hostages still in Israel, in Gaza. There's hostages sitting in tunnels, fighting for their lives, taken from their beds at a wee hour of the morning of October 7th, right? You have 30 dead bodies, innocent people. You have Israeli soldiers going in and trying to get those hostages out, and more than 20 already have died just to get the 20 that are alive. I mean, think about the case scenario. You have Israel fighting to stop Hamas from existing because that is the terrorists that came to their doors. They tried over the years to create a Gaza, which was supposed to give back the ability to create a state, and they did it, to create an element of livelihood for their people, and all the money went into construction of tunnels. So they're fighting this big war, and all of a sudden, what do you expect is going to happen when they are trying to move people to safety so that they can try to put the Hamas terrorists in one place, in one area, and they have to keep moving the people so they don't kill more people. So this is a problem. They are pushing the people south, north, north, south. This has happened throughout the war. And right now, the concentration of what's going down is in the north, and there's a lot of rubble. A lot was demolished, and that's the hard reality of this very hard war, and history will judge it. Having said this, Israel is not going to create concentration camps. They know what they are themselves. And I think that reading this and believing that is dangerous. Israel will be involved, probably in terms of the security components. The outside world will be involved in what's going to happen in terms of rebuilding Gaza and what that plan looks like. We have interviewed people through our agency in Italy, as a matter of fact, an architect who in one of the very prestigious universities in Venice has created a concept. I want you to know he was attacked. He is not Jewish, and he was attacked just recently because he was involved in coming up with a plan that was going to help the Gazans. That is the reality. So you have to understand the facts of what are happening on the ground to be able to share that information and read appropriately the terms that are being used. And if somebody uses the word concentration camps, that should raise a big red flag.
Definitely.
I hope.
Sorry, go on. I think we are coming up to time shortly. So as the last question, we usually ask our guests, how can people here follow what you're doing and support your work?
Well, Robert, I want to thank you and Alan and your organization for the great work you're doing, and appreciate the time to speak to some of your people. And you can always email. I'm always available. Everybody knows that. Barely sleep. So they're welcome to email me at ffriedson, Friedson, at gmail.com. I'm sorry, ffriedson@themedialine.org. That's what I mean, not sleep. ffriedson@themedialine.org. And also to sign up for our daily news brief, as well as to help support our student program. Our scholarships are $25,000 for 3 months. It covers all the airfare and administrative and a stipend for the students. And this is the way we change the future. I'd love to come out to Australia and to speak to groups. Happy to do so, help to educate, because the future is in our hands. Each and every one of us can make a very big difference to change. And it's not about the narrative about Israel, it's to change the narrative at large. We can change the playing field for the world. And thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a very uplifting message to end on, and what was a very interesting talk and a very interesting Q&A. So thank you so much again, Felice, and thank you to Romy Liebler for organizing tonight. And I would advise everyone to check out your website to sign up for the updates, because real journalism, it's pretty hard to come by these days. So thank you again.
And Romy has an op-ed opinions on our site, so look for that and much more. You'll find things on the Media Line you don't see anywhere. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Felice. Thank you everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank you.